To download Unreal Engine 5, first we need to download the Epic Games Store. We did this earlier with Twinmotion and Unreal Engine 4.6, so it may already be on your computer. Head to epicgames.com and click the download button in the top right corner. Once it's downloaded, open the Epic Games Launcher app. Navigate to the Unreal Engine tab on the left, and click. Now, at the top of the screen are 6 tabs. First of all, the UE5 tab is where you can start with Unreal Engine 5. Click the blue button to download. Next, the UE4 tab is for Unreal Engine 4, we've been there before. Next, the Learn tab has great tutorials. The Marketplace is home to all of the assets other Unreal Engine users have created. This is where you can buy and download objects or textures for your projects. Finally, the Library shows which versions you currently have installed, as well as any plugins you've integrated. Under that, you can see any projects you've created. And farther down shows the Vault, which contains all of the assets you've purchased or downloaded from the Marketplace. Now that you've downloaded Unreal Engine 5, go ahead and launch it. Here's your project browser. On the right, you can see all of the projects you can open. And on the left are template categories. We'll be focusing on the third-person game template for this tutorial, which places the user behind a character on a basic level. But there are other options, such as cinematic templates. And perhaps more significantly, architectural visualization for building walkthroughs. There are also automotive templates. Navigate back to the Games tab and select the third-person option. After selecting the template, you can choose a file destination and project name. Keep in mind, your project has to start with a letter and cannot contain special characters. There are a couple other options to keep in mind. Blueprint is Unreal Engine's node-based scripting. You can choose between this and classic coding with C++. I think Blueprint is much easier, so I'll stick with it. Next, choose your desired platform and quality preset. If you have a weaker computer, you may want to lower this. Keep starter content checked to include the default assets of this project. Finally, ray tracing can provide very realistic and beautiful graphics. However, it is extremely cumbersome for a computer and is only usable with ray tracing compatible devices. Only activate this if you have an RTX graphics card, strong computer, and have the time for it. Click Create to launch your new project. Welcome to the new Unreal Engine 5 interface. Let me walk you through the basics. Let's start in the top left of the screen. Here you can create or open a new level. Projects are composed of a series of levels, so if you make numerous, you can keep them all in the same project. This could be useful when creating separate iterations of something. This is also where you will save your levels and projects. Saving all is a good practice. You can also import or export levels to and from other projects, or create an entirely separate project from here. Under the Edit tab, you can find your history, basic editing tools like copying and pasting, as well as editor and project settings. Additionally, you can load third-party plugins from here and use source control. Source control is how more than one person can work on the same project simultaneously. Next, the Window tab contains all of panels available for level editing. Clicking on one will activate it and it should appear somewhere on your window. The content browser will be very useful later. In UE4 it was permanently docked to the bottom of the user interface. In UE5, you have the option to enable or disable it. We'll talk about it more later. In the Tools tab, you'll find more advanced features we won't cover in this tutorial. Moving on to the Build tab. Under this tab, you'll find everything you need to build parts of your level. From here, you can build lighting assets, paths, loads, textures, landscapes, and so on. Finally, under the Help tab you can find technical documentation and links to useful resources provided by Epic Games. Let's move on to the next section, directly below. From here, you can save your project quickly. The Create tab is one place you'll regularly visit. This is where you can create assets, such as lights, shapes, cameras, effects, or interactable objects. For future reference, an actor is any asset, like a tree, rock, or wall. A character is an asset in which you can control, like a person or animal. And a pawn is an asset in which you can possess with a character, such as a vehicle, spaceship, or horse. Next, we have the content panel, which is probably the one you'll be clicking the most. This is another place you can access your content browsers. It's also where you can access Quixel Bridge in the Epic Games Marketplace. Quixel Bridge is one of the best features of Unreal Engine 5. It is a fully integrated asset library filled with over 16,000 high-resolution objects. You can create worlds that are indecipherable from photos or worlds straight out of fantasy with the objects in this library, all for free. I'll show you how to use it in just a bit. Similarly, the Epic Games Marketplace is a store full of assets created by other users of Unreal Engine. Although it isn't free and doesn't include the nanite megascans like Quixel, it does include a much larger database of objects, having been added to since the beginning of Unreal. Doesn't look like it's working right now. Let's move on to Blueprints. Blueprints is to Unreal Engine as Grasshopper is to Rhino, except it's much more necessary. Everything within Unreal Engine has code behind it, and Blueprints is how you visualize and control it. I won't be covering much on it, but here's a brief example. Let's look at this cube. It has a material applied to it. Even the material has code behind it, indicating its color, texture, lighting properties, and physics. All of this is editable for any object by double-clicking on it in its detail panel. Once you save the changes in Blueprint, it will be applied to the level. It's an extremely powerful tool, so play around with it. Last is the Cinematics tab. This is where you can create a camera sequence, much like the Set Path Animation command in Rhino. Moving on, let's take a look at the main editing modes. They are the buttons just to the right. The first of the buttons is the default mode. It allows you to select objects and adjust their positions, scales, or copy them and such. The second button is the landscape editor. This is where you can sculpt the topography of your world. You can either start from scratch and use the tool brushes to sculpt, or import a height map and start off with some topography. I'll show you a brief example of this later. Height maps are PNGs that are read as gradients. The darker the pixel is, the lower it is to the ground. The lighter the pixel, the higher the elevation. The third button is the foliage editor. Similar to the landscape editor, it comes with a series of tools. Here you can apply an asset like a tree, bush, or grass to the tool and paint or fill it onto your model with ease, rather than placing each one individually. The next button is the mesh paint editor, where you can paint materials onto your geometry. Then comes the fracture editor, where you can make an object fall apart in a specific way. For example, we could turn this staircase into stone that crumbles when you walk on it. The last mode is brush editing mode, which we don't need to see quite yet. And that's it for the editor modes. Now I'll show you how to control your character, or start a cinematic view. Just press the green play button to the right. Now you're playing your level. Pan the camera by moving the mouse and use ASDW to move forward or backward. Spacebar is jump. You can also plug in a controller. You can add more animations and types of movement like sprinting or sliding with Blueprint, but I don't think that's very necessary for architecture walkthroughs. Press escape to exit play mode. Under the play button are more options too. For example, you could activate multiplayer model and control numerous characters at once, or play with someone on a network. The platform button next to the play button allows you to change what will be controlling your game. You can switch between operating systems there. The next area of the user interface should look quite familiar if you use Rhino. These are your viewport settings, where you can adjust your field of view or lens length, and what type of display resolution you desire for your camera. The next section is where all of the views can be accessed. Similar to right-clicking on your viewport in Rhino, here you can find perspective, top, bottom, right, left, and any custom camera angles you've created. Switching to cinematic mode will clean up the geometry significantly. Viewport display options are very important in Rhino. Switching between wireframe, shaded, rendered, or Arctic modes change what you can see and what you can present at any given time. Unreal has these options too, in the next button to the right. By default, new views are set to wireframe, just like Rhino, but here you can switch them to lit, which is like shaded. Unlit. Default lighting. Only lighting. Only reflections. Player collisions. And visual collisions. Or any of the optimized modes which you'll see with Nanite geometry in the demonstration later. The next tab is where you can adjust what type of geometry is visible in the viewport, much like the Display Properties panel in Rhino. Moving on to the other side of the screen, there are some more familiar tools. This is basically your gumball control and OSnap settings. Let's focus on this staircase. Right now I have the Move tool selected, which will display a gumball with arrows just like Rhino. Holding and dragging an arrow will move it. And holding Alt will keep the original, also just like Rhino. These 4 buttons are a selection tool, move tool, rotate tool, and scale tool. I'll demonstrate how each one works. It's pretty straightforward. The button to the right of those other 4 determines if the gumball is based on the local geometry or the world plane. The local gumball will match the orientation of the object, while the world gumball will always face the same way after editing an object. Next to that are surface snap settings, like OSnap settings. Then, grid snap settings. These snaps are unique in that you can quickly adjust their scale. If you want larger or smaller snaps, it's very easy to change that with the numbers listed below the buttons. The same goes for angle snaps, and scale snaps. Holding Shift while dragging an object will lock the camera to it until released. You can also change the speed in which your viewport moves with the next button to the right. Be careful though, you don't want to lose your level. Possibly the most familiar feature is the ability to view 4 viewports simultaneously. Additionally, related viewports will adjust together in order to keep your geometry aligned. The last button here is the Overlay tab. It allows you to place composition overlays on your viewport. This is helpful when you need to follow a specific proportion in a scene or composition. You can quickly adjust the sun by holding Ctrl, L, and right-click, then moving your mouse around. Nearly finished with this portion of the walkthrough. On the right are important properties to keep your eye on. Whenever you select an object, all of its composition properties will appear on right. Typically, all of the properties are directly editable here. Double-clicking on a material or object in this area will automatically open its blueprint. One last thing. Let's talk about the content browser, and then get to a brief demonstration of landscape generation and importing assets from Quixel. The content browser is very important. Every single thing you load into your project will be displayed in this library. It is the memory bank of your operation. You can create folders within here and reorder things if need be, but the file organization and structure is very clean to begin with. Anytime you import an object, this is where you'll need to go to see it if it's not physically in the level yet. Get familiar with the content browser and keep it in mind. There are many ways to get to it, but the main way is by selecting it in the bottom left corner of your screen. Okay, let's start a new level so I can show you the basics of landscape generation. Click File, New Level, then select the time of day preset so we start with some atmosphere. Save or don't save the current level, it doesn't matter. The new level should open shortly. Here we are, a blank level to populate. Remember, you can fly around by holding right-click, and pressing ASD and W. If you are moving slowly, adjust your camera speed with the slider mentioned earlier in the top right of your viewport. Okay, let's get started. Press the Landscape Editor button. You can't sculpt land until there is geometry to start with. Either add it in manually, or do what I'm about to do and load in a terrain height map. If you don't have a hay map yet, go online and search for some. They should be grayscale PNGs. They can be different resolutions, but make sure they are square. The one I'll be working with is larger, at a resolution of 2048 by 2048. I imported my height map by pressing Import at the bottom. I'm going to fly around quickly to check if I can work with it. This terrain looks nice, but I would like to have some bigger variation height-wise. In order to achieve this, I'm going to go into selection mode, select the terrain I imported, delete it, then go back to import it again. Before I press import, I'm going to increase the Z-scale significantly. This will add a larger difference between the highest point on the height map and the lowest point. You can also achieve this by increasing the contrast of the PNG prior to uploading. This is looking much better. The topography is much more visible, though, but we can fix that with the sculpting tools next. I'll choose this mountain to show you what these tools can do. The brushes act just like Photoshop brushes, but in 3D. You can adjust the flow, intensity, drop-off, size, and shape of each brush. Additionally, each brush has a different effect. This is the basic sculpt brush. It adds lands to the existing topography wherever I click. Notice how much changing the brush properties affects the land. Decreasing the tool strength will give you more control, so you don't end up with a bulbous mountain like me. Mess around with changing the brush fall off. This will prevent you from noticing the brush marks on the landscape, which you can see very clearly while I work. The smooth brush is very useful, and straightforward. It simply smooths out the rough edges of your landscape. Be careful with it though, it's pretty easy to make your rigid mountains look like melted candles while using it. The smooth tool will be very useful for me so I can get rid of the topographical lines in my landscape. Next is the flatten brush. Well, flattens. This is good for creating flat areas that you can populate with buildings. Flat areas are a lot easier to navigate with a character too. Another great use for it is flattening land that will be unreachable underwater. Now, say you're like me and you hate how smooth your mountain looks now that you smoothed it out too much. The erosion brush will bring that magical mountain texture back. Look at that, we're back to rigid. Okay, I'm going to speed this up and work on another mountain range. Okay, looks good enough to me for the demonstration. Let's get behind a character and jump on the mountains. Then, I'll show you how to use Quixel Bridge. Wow! That's a long fall. Looks like the topography is too steep for me to climb. But I'll run along here to test the collisions and get a sense of scale. Keep in mind, this landscape mesh is just the base for applying assets too. On top of these ridges could be layers of dense foliage, a waterfall, rock cliffs, or a platform for a log cabin to sit upon. This landscape mesh looks like it could be the good foundation for a huge beautiful project. Okay, let's move on to another level to learn how Quixel works. Here's a fresh level. I'm just going to scale up the base so I can place my assets on it easier. That's better. Now, let's go to the Content tab I mentioned before. Go down to Quixel Bridge and click on it. This will open the asset library we saw earlier. Under Collections, you can find assets grouped together based on a project. If you find an image you like, all of the assets used to create that rendering will be included in the collection. This is a great place to find inspiration for environments and all of the assets you need all in one place. Take some time to browse through Quixel and like some of the assets. Spherical ones are textures and materials. Then there are actual objects. There are also decals and visual effects too. Perhaps one of the more applicable categories for architects is the ArchVis section. It contains collections of everything architecture, from specific wall constructions to imperfections for glass. It even has food you can populate a counter with for an interior rendering. I think the assets I want to see most right now are the Canyon Megascans Quixel used to showcase Unreal Engine 5. I'm going to find a few of those and show you the next steps. This asset is an enormous cliff scanned with an 8K resolution drone in Utah. I'm going to pick this one and two others. When you find something you like, click the asset and select a resolution. The lower the resolution, the easier it is to run, but the lower the quality. I'm going to choose Nanite, which is an amazing new feature specific to UE5. It's geometry with dynamic resolutions. I'll demonstrate this later. After you choose your model resolution, just click Download. Keep in mind though, Megascans like these take up a lot of space on your computer. Okay, once your models are downloaded, head to the Local tab on the left. These are all of the assets that are saved onto your computer. Drag and drop the asset into your Unreal Engine viewport to place it in the model. It may take a moment for them to load. Now that I've imported my assets from Quixel, let's check them out. I'm going to scale it up and move it onto my platform. Mess around with other assets to see how easily they blend together. As I mentioned before, all imported objects will appear in the content browser. To access an object-specific location in the content browser, simply right-click on it and click Browse to Asset. From here you can make any changes you want to the object. Okay, let's check out a close-up of these Megascans. They look so realistic, especially with Unreal's new lighting system, Lumen. Let's check out the Nanite triangle view. This will show how Nanite is really working. Rather than having one set resolution, Nanite will automatically change the triangle count of any given mesh based off of how close you are to it. This improves performance significantly and allows for the creation of enormous realistic worlds. Notice how the colored spots get bigger relative to the object the farther I get from it. That is Nanite. I'll do it again just in case you missed it the first time. Okay, let's get behind the character one more time to explore the canyon cliff. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and demonstration, and I hope you learned something new. Goodbye.